Hello everyone, Lytro Storm here, and today I'm continuing another Walking Dead What If, Part 2 of What If Molly Stayed with the Group. If you haven't already seen Part 1, it should be self-explanatory that you need to see it. It'll be linked in the description and comments section. Just make sure you're caught up before you watch this video, as it's kind of really important. But with that being said, let's just go ahead and get into the video, and if you do end up liking it, be sure to subscribe and like and comment and all that stuff. After arriving at the ski lodge, Clementine sees Kenny and the two would embrace. The night would basically go the same, but with Kenny saying he wasn't sure if Molly would stick around, but he's very glad that she did. Being able to see Clementine safe again really just made things better for him. He would also apologize for trying to jump Molly all that time ago in season 1, so that's kind of nice of him, I guess. But anyway, the gang all enjoy themselves until walkers start pulling up. Here, Molly helping out would lead to Nick surviving no matter what instead of it being a choice, as while she doesn't like the guy, she's also not going to let him die. After that, Carver and his men arrive and get everyone tied up. Molly and Clem would be with Rebecca and Alvin, and so as Clem, you can choose to go look for Kenny or Luke, or stay hidden. Molly will follow you wherever you go to ensure that Clementine stays safe. In the end, Walter would be killed, and you can choose whether or not you let Kenny shoot again. If you do, then Alvin dies. Here, the three of you would give yourselves up, and Carver would take Hilda. He admires the weapon and says that since Molly was so annoying back at the cabin, he's gonna take this now. After getting everyone tied up, Carver then forces everyone to go to House. On the other side, if Clem and Molly turn themselves in, then Carver would take Hilda right there. Molly would try and undo Carlos's bindings, so he ends up punching Carver in the face. This makes Carver pretty angry, so he uses Hilda and stabs him in the eye. Carlos survives, but he is in agony at this pain. Kenny shooting at them would still remain the same, though Molly would try and protect Clem if she saves Alvin. She does still get taken down anyway, since they're all at gunpoint though. Kenny is forced to give up, and so everyone gets taken to House either way, but this time Carlos has a cool eye. Throughout the third episode of season 2, I don't see too much changing at first. Molly would be at House and would be angry trying to help them all escape. She is made to work separate from Clementine so that Carver can try and take Clem under his wing. When the walkie-talkie plan is found out, Molly would try to take the blame, but Kenny does it instead. She would be very thankful towards him and actually feel kinda bad for Kenny when he gets beaten up for it. But I do still think she's advocating for leaving without him since he's injured now. But they don't have to since Kenny is still kicking. He joins them in their plan to escape, with the only difference being that Molly takes Hilda from Carver after Kenny shoots him. She then leaves Kenny to do whatever he wants, as she isn't going to waste her time trying to negotiate. When Jane shoots Troy and leaves him for the walkers, Molly is actually kind of impressed. They eventually get separated, with Molly joining Clem, Jane, and Rebecca. So Rita and Carlos both die, and Nick gets shot in the shoulder here too. When Rebecca gets angry at Jane, Molly would be telling her to calm down. She had lost her own sister, so Rebecca bringing that subject up ticked her off. But luckily, they eventually make it back to the rest of the group, and when Kenny is mad at Clem, Molly defends her. She tells him to lay off, as she just did what she thought was right in the moment regarding Sarita. The two then join Jane in looking for Sarah, Nick, and Luke. When Jane starts telling them about their group falling apart, Molly sees her points and thinks on it. If the group is gonna fall, then maybe her getting out of there would save Clem. Anyway, the three girls find Nick as a walker, and Clementine kills him. They then move on and try to save Sarah and Luke. Molly holds the walkers off while Jane, Luke, and Clem try to find a way out. Molly wants to save Sarah as she wasn't able to save her sister, so she's not gonna let another little girl die. So when she hears Jane tell Clem to leave her, she kicks it into high gear and slaps Sarah herself. So no matter what, Sarah makes it out alive. Molly tells her that she's sorry afterward and tries to encourage her to keep going. After that, she marches to Jane and asks her what the deal was. She's ready to leave a little girl to die a brutal death, and Molly is not down for that whatsoever. At that point, Jane reveals her own backstory, saying that she was forced to leave her sister behind. This makes Molly even more angry and causes her to reply that she didn't have a choice with her own sister, but Jane did, and she let her die anyway. Jane defends herself, saying that she didn't know what else to do, but Molly just isn't hearing it. After an argument, the five make it back to the group, and Molly goes with Clem to the observation deck instead of Jane. If they get put into a bad situation, she knows Jane would leave Clementine behind, so she's not gonna let that happen. When Arvo shows up, they'd have pretty much the same scene, with Molly filling Jane's role. The only difference is that she probably isn't gonna threaten Arvo in the end, and even says that she's sorry if they end up robbing them. Since Jane wasn't doing that, she would have helped Mike and Bonnie instead of Clem. So the gang are eventually forced to go onto the observation deck to survive after the walker horde pulls up. Luckily, Molly's skills, as well as having Hilda there as a pry bar, would save Sarah from falling off the deck this time, so she survives. AJ is born and Jane leaves. The gunfight with the Russians occurs, and Rebecca dies, ending season 4. Also, Molly would probably be advocating to leave immediately, but she might honestly choose to stay as well. It's not... I could see it either way since there is a baby. After that, the gang deals with the Russians and Jane even returns in the end, though Sarah would have been shot and would bleed out after the fight was over. Jane apologizes to Molly, saying that she's sorry that she died, but Molly turns and tells her not to talk. If she'd had died before, she wouldn't have cared at all. The group moves on, and the last of that day would end up the same, just with Molly being someone you have to make join the campfire. To do that, you have to talk to her and remind her that Sarah wasn't her fault, and that they'll make it through. If this succeeds, Molly joins the group at the campfire. If you end up not succeeding, Jane sees Clementine's failure and tries to talk to her again, leading to Molly pushing her before storming off. The next day, Luke and Bonnie fall into the ice, and if Clem tries to save them, Molly grabs her. She doesn't want her risking her own life, but their combined weight makes them fall in, and so Bonnie is saved either way. You can either end up saving Bonnie with Clem and potentially Molly freezing, or not save Bonnie. Either way, Luke's a goner though. The rest of the episode goes about the same, with Molly also agreeing with Kenny that they should go to Wellington. This is due to her being on the road with Krista and Clem, so they had also heard about Wellington during this time, as Krista did in the original game. Mike, Arvo, and potentially Bonnie then all pack up to leave at night, with Clem trying to stop them. This leads to Arvo shooting Clem, which makes Molly, Kenny, and Jane all rush out of the house. Thankfully, she survives and wakes up in the truck next to Molly. Molly is very happy that she lived, but when Kenny and Jane start arguing, Molly is repeatedly making Jane shut up. She's literally her biggest hater here. And you could even see that Molly and Kenny were I was kind of building that up so that way they could kind of be on the same side here, especially now that Molly and Jane are at odds. They're going to Wellington, and that's final. Eventually, Kenny storms off to look for a way around all the cars, and walkers begin approaching. Molly drives, but they end up crashing, and so Jane takes AJ. Molly and Clem escape and try to look for Jane, and they make it to the rest stop and see Kenny, and Jane returns. She doesn't have AJ though, which scares everybody. Molly goes with Kenny to look around, but they don't end up finding him. This leads to Kenny going back and trying to fight Jane. And also, Jane gives Clementine the same warning that she did in canon. Molly tries to stop Kenny from fighting, saying that they shouldn't waste any more lives, but Kenny knocks her aside. He and Jane's battle begins, with Molly and Clem helping out when one of them has the upper hand. And if we're being honest here, Molly was able to kick the crap out of Kenny and also fight pretty much on par with Lee, depending on the version you take. So Molly helping out against Kenny would be kind of useful. She doesn't want to risk her own life, as she has to protect Clem as well. And so when Kenny tries killing Jane at the end, Molly sits aside. She had already tried to save them both, but they just continued fighting, so it was pointless. The choice does still come down to Clementine because of this, who can either shoot Kenny or look away like Molly. If she looks away, then Kenny kills Jane and they find AJ. Molly says that Kenny is way too unhinged, as her helping him didn't even make him stop. He apologizes, promising to work on it. This offer can either be accepted by Clem, or she and Molly can leave him behind, out of fear that what he's done is too much. If they go with him, then they go to Wellington, but only Clem and AJ are accepted to go since they're kids. If Clem chooses to go, she leaves Kenny and Molly and joins Wellington with AJ. And if not, then she stays with everybody. So if you choose this ending, everything from here on out pretty much goes the same, since it's just Clem and AJ going forward. If you don't go to Wellington, then the three of you leave with AJ. And if you leave Kenny behind, we'd see Clem and Molly work together to go through a herd after covering themselves in guts. Anyway, going back to the initial choice of shooting Kenny, if you do so, then Jane would thank you. Molly hears AJ, and so she rushes after the noise with Clementine. Clementine catches up with her only to see Molly's face in shock, and that shock quickly turns to malice. Jane approaches and Molly says that she'd better have a good explanation. Jane says that she knew Kenny would react that way, so she set it up to protect Molly and Clem. Clementine looks at Jane and sees Hilda stabbed through her head. Clem then looked up at Molly, who was visibly angry as she took Hilda out of Jane's face. Clementine is shocked because of this, and Molly justifies herself between heavy breaths. She says that Jane left her sister to die, she tried to leave Sarah to die, and now she forced Clem to kill Kenny. There was no way they were going to keep her in the group. She would have just given up on them too, and Molly won't take that. She has to keep her promise to Lee. And so now, because of this action, Clementine has a new choice to either go with Molly still or leave her behind because she pretty much just murdered Jane. Like, even if you think it's justified, it's still murder. Jane didn't try and put up a fight. If this does end up being too much for your Clementine and you choose to leave her behind, Molly would try and stop her, but she can't bring herself to force Clementine to stay, as if recognizing that what she did probably was a bit too much. So Clem takes AJ and then goes off on her own. But if Clem stays with her, then they get the same ending where they survive together with AJ. So basically, in this version, you don't get to stay with Jane no matter what. She's dying at the end of season 2. Sorry. And that's where we're gonna end part 2, perfectly setting up for part 3. I really liked building up the divide between her and Jane, and I love how the ending turned out with her actually killing her. Jesus Christ, that makes me sound like I'm a Jane hater. I'm not. I just think this is what would happen. I think having Molly be pushed to the point where she's actually willing to just straight out kill Jane for what she's done is really cool, and I think I built to it kind of nicely. Hopefully in the last 2 parts you could see how Molly has just been pushed and pushed and pushed, especially with this part with Jane and Kenny's arguments. And now it's kind of to the point where she's kind of just pulling a dictatorship and is just doing whatever she has to keep Clem safe. It's also kind of neat too because people think Jane and Molly are really similar, and I also think the same, but I think seeing where they do oppose each other is really cool in this What If. But anyways guys, in the next part we'll be covering a new frontier with the endings where Clem is with Molly, and also the ending where Clem is with Molly and Kenny. As I can't really do the alone ending since, I mean, she would just be alone. But as always, tell me if you liked this part, tell me what you think will happen next, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.